Okay, so we continue with self-control. Certainly in the conversations we've been having, I realize how easy it is to sort of go off on certain tangents
Yes.
simply because self-control relates to every facet of life. So it doesn't matter what we're talking about, it's going to be able to be a part of our discussion. So one of the things that we were talking about just before we started now was, what?
Oh, how hard it is.
Why is self-control so
And
difficult?
I mean, and again, I'm not gonna, this is something that I realize is a lot of titles on the YouTube videos about it is like how to do the hard things and how to persevere through hard things, how to force your brain and all of this. And then you realize it's a bit of a soundbite to be honest. It's a bit of a hook to watch them. But I think we wanna first question if self control is attached to the right source of kind of motivators, should it be hard? Is it always hard? And is there something there that we should question and then change?
Well, there's no question. Again, you've heard me say this a couple of times, and you've questioned the use of the word trick, right?
Yes.
The idea is simply this. I think when we have a good understanding of what's happening in our thinking and mind and brain, what we realize is we're able to develop what I term super self control,
True.
right? Or another way of describing that is high efficacy. In other words, it's very effective and low effort. And
Ideal.
ideally,
Yeah.
if self control is such an integral part of any success, we would like it to be as efficient and effective and consistent as possible. So there's absolutely no question, as we relate to that, there will be times when there is a level of fatigue or there is a level of temptation where even the most well anchored intrinsic self control can be difficult, right? Either because something is so incredibly tempting or so incredibly threatening. Okay. But what you'll find is if you're able to intrinsically motivate with the things that will come up in the discussion now, the trick, as it were, what you'll find is that there is much less need for repetitive acts of self control. The first one is sufficient, and we're moving on to whatever else it was
Yes.
that was required. So there's an efficiency not only in the ease with which we can end up making a decision, but the frequency of the decisions that need to be made. So, because self control is inherently so difficult for most people in most things, it's why we would really, really need to understand again some sort of flick of a switch or something that we could anchor that motivation in to get us to act in line with better judgment. So I would often, and again, a lot of the terminology that I use is just terminology that I've sort of, utilized over the years. So oftentimes I will explain it. I very seldom ever talk about willpower. In fact, I guess even in as long as you've known me, I've probably not said willpower, a handful of times maybe. And it's usually in a context like this saying, willpower for me is that sense of I've got to grab that
Yes.
crowbar and literally crank up and muster all that I can to sort of, open up a gap for me to see why would this be worth me giving up on something that is instantly satisfying or grinding out having to do something right now that, man, I really don't feel like doing. If you find yourself having to do that, it's just a matter of time before you give in. And I've explained already in one of the other videos why that usually is a fairly slippery slope. So the bottom line is this. When we look at the two parts, and when I say parts, I'm talking functional units, sort of neural circuits. So it's, components of the brain that are, yes, related to the anatomy, but also related to how they interconnect in sort of a compartmentalized or modular fashion. They work together to basically drive our assessment of things, make a case for what's best. I think, as we're able to understand those things and what makes things difficult and what allows for things to be easy or easier, it allows us to become much better at developing super self control. So here's how I would look at it. If we look at the brain, and I use that description of, again, miss, that impulsive side, my instant satisfaction seeker, that's the one that's calling for forget about the future, forget about what, take the easy route, take the satisfying route, take advantage of what's on offer. That's that part of the brain that I know all of us can relate to. Why? Because the whole environment of the world, online as well as just generally, is set up to appeal to that side of the brain. Why? Because that's what we're willing to trade money for.
Yes.
Bottom line,
That's where
that's
consumerism comes in.
consumerism. It comes down at the end of the
Yes.
day to, if you can, I'm willing to pay, and I'm representing humanity here, right? Willing to pay for something that's satisfying. The question is what I'm paying for genuinely satisfying or worth it compared to other things that I may
Yes.
have, or worth the cost down the line? Nothing for nothing. I'm either going to pay now or I'm going to pay later. Whatever it is, I'm going to pay with energy and effort now and reap the rewards down the line, or I'm going to pay something now, right? That might be financial or something else, and I'm going to suffer the consequences down the line. Nothing for nothing in life. Okay. So when I look at that part of the brain, the world is feeding that side, which immediately, if we just left it there, will tell us why self control is so difficult. Because that part wants instant satisfaction, and it's not thinking about the consequences. It's not thinking about future reward of things more valuable. So the other part is the part that's developing later on in life, mid-20s and that sort of thing, which loosely I would say is prefrontal cortex and those components, the areas where we think and calculate, and the higher executive functions and the calculations, and what we know is the main area where we exercise self-control. But that part of the brain is massively energy dependent, which is why typically as we go through a day of saying no to this, or not getting angry with this person, or saying no to that temptation, as the day progresses, right, this part of the brain fatigues and we're inclined to default to that impulsive part, which is why most of the things that would be, sort of acts of lacking self-control or impulsive, instantly gratifying things typically happen in the latter part of the days, or at night, or when we're fatigued, that kind of thing. So when we depend on this part of the brain, the one that is looking to the future and future value, as the one that, in essence, if you could picture it like this, you've got this miss trying to make a case for what's most satisfying, and you've got fuss trying to make a case for most satisfying, to the mind that is deciding simply, I'm just going to pick whatever's best. Whoever presents the best case, that's what I'm going to choose. That's the picture that I sort of described when I wrote the book, Something Bigger. It's the idea that you've got these two lawyers, each trying to make a case, each trying to win the judge over in favor of what they are presenting as being maximally satisfying. So you've got this part of the brain here, my instant part, that is drawing attention. It's right there in front of you. Smell it, look at it, see it. You know how satisfying this is. That part of the brain doesn't require a tremendous amount of energy. The world's feeding it. And you've got this other part that is trying to make such a strong case for why that's a bad decision, or why that's not ultimately what you want. And again, as soon as you add emotion, as soon as you add something sensory, as soon as you add something to that equation that is immediately attractive, it becomes very, very difficult for that part of the brain that looks to the future, to the goal, to go ahead and say, you know what, it's still the best thing to forego the instant satisfaction, or it's definitely the best thing to do the hard work now because of the reward down the line. The brain is just structured, wired, fueled in the kind of way that becomes incredibly difficult to sustain. So that's an intrinsic problem with all of its physiology that goes with that. The environment, no matter which way you cut it, is set up for impulsivity. That's just, for the most part, that is how it's set up online and in our world, right? So we look at that and we say, okay, people have approached that with the idea that if I can make a goal so attractive, so appealing, that in that moment, it's attractive enough to say no to whatever the impulsive thing, whether it be alcohol, or whether it be whatever's on the screen, or whether it be the food, or whatever else it is, or the not having to exert effort for sake of the comfort of now. If I can make the goal that attractive by making it this dream big kind of thing and so awesome, then it can compete in the moment. Now, the irony is, while you're setting up that goal, the part of the brain that's heavily on board is the impulsive part. That's why it's so exciting, because it's momentarily exciting as I think about how cool this is going to be. But the moment the work and the effort and the time delay is incorporated into that, this part of the brain forgets that very, very quickly. So oftentimes setting the kinds of goals that really excite you in the moment, they oftentimes, unless they are supported, the actions required to bring about those goals are supported by something much more stable, we end up literally just heightening our expectation and increasing the sense of failure when we don't achieve. So again, there are many things that we try and fix that ultimately end up becoming counterproductive. And that's something that I really try and guard people against. So here's the trick. Here's the trick. Can I get Miss to compete with itself? Can I, when I'm in a cool, calm, collected state, when I'm not hot-headed, when I'm not switched off to everything, but I am thinking, a little bit more clearly, and I'm not massively tempted by something, and I'm in a state where I can see value for what it is rather than, something that is influenced by diminishing time or work. I had to put in time and effort. It diminishes the value, right? When I'm seeing things for what they are, can I persuade myself that doing what's required, the plan, the good decision to bring about a future outcome, which both parts of the brain are happy to agree is more valuable, right, in this moment. It is more valuable to be healthy, and it is more valuable to, take care of my health and, lose weight and, put in the effort into my relationship and work hard so that I can find it is more valuable ultimately. We know that, as you said, we know that. But if I can say the actions required are not motivated by the outcome, but are motivated by a reason, and the difference is this: the work required here to bring about something that I may or may not get in the future, the uncertainty of the future and the distance there to is enough to discount the value. Whereas if I do what I do for a reason, in other words, I do it out of something that I already have, well, what's that? That's my identity. That's my morality. Those are my values. Those are my responsibilities. So I distinguish these things in such a way. The way you get Miss to actually start working for your goals is to feel Miss with the motivation that comes from what is immediately at stake. If I am motivated to go ahead and do this thing for a person, which means taking my time, taking my energy, and I'm having to forego something that could be fun right now. I'm not going to go ahead and play around a golf right now. I'm going to give my time to this particular person who is struggling, and I'm doing that only for some future outcome. I promise you, I'm going to default and play golf, pretty soon. But if I'm saying I'm willing to sacrifice that, not indefinitely, because the reason is my role and my responsibility to my patients or to my family is such that that's who I am. So I will do what's required right now for the reason that it allows me to be consistent with who I am and what I believe deeply on my
So I'm just
responsibilities.
gonna ask you there,
Yes.
when you are acting in line with identity,
Yes.
does the miss have the kick immediately as well? So I just want to
Absolutely.
emphasize that there is no sense of loss because you're actually not, right? I just want to emphasize this.
100%. I said before that and I say this on, there are 6 things according to my mind map that make us unhappy. The fourth one is what we call incongruency or inconsistency, right? Or contradiction. If we are clear on who we are in terms of identity, and that's a whole other discussion because I think many people are not, which is why the trick depends on great clarity on my purpose, on my person, on my responsibilities, on my all of these things. If it's going to be anchored
What's
to
worth
something,
pursuing really
it
in life?
best
Yeah.
be an anchor. I can't hook it to something that's wishy-washy that I think maybe. So it's rooted in something that is a conviction. I describe it as a person who is exercising self-control from conviction. That person is usually able to exercise self-control very clearly, very decisively, very efficiently, and is able to keep doing that. Now, I do believe that Miss desperately wants the instant satisfaction, not only of the consistency of behaving in line with what is immediately. If I break what I am right now. I say I'm an honest person. The moment I lie, which is now, I've got to question that. So we're inclined now again to remove the time delay. And by doing that for reason, it's now, it's in the moment. I am this person. I can't say I am this person and act inconsistently with it. That creates a cognitive dissonance. That creates incongruence. That creates hypocrisy. The brain hates that. The mind and the brain hate the idea that I am not consistent with who I think or believe that I am. So I'm massively drawing on that. In other words, when a person feels guilty, guilt is only ever the consequence of having done something I believe is wrong or I believe is unfair. Now, whether you're rightly informed or how you're informed as to what you think is right or wrong is a whole other discussion. But that is why people will die for what they believe. When they're going into that, it's not the goal. I'm looking forward to dying for what I believe, right? Unless they
It's a
consider that
consequence of
it
acting
is,
on the.
absolutely, it is the extreme consequence of the ultimate loss for something that is consistent with who I am, with what I believe my purpose is, with who I say this. I mean, and I actually fully believe it. If I was sitting here right now with my wife and my three girls, and somebody walked in with a gun and they said, one of you's got to go, I wouldn't hesitate. And I don't even think I would be afraid. The sheer delight of being able to sacrifice everything that I am for everything that they are to me, it's a no brainer. And guess what's motivating that? Miss. Miss working in
Feeling.
conjunction with fuss.
It's an instant satisfaction.
That is the trick. It is an instant satisfaction. So, in essence, I need to find the kinds of things that I'm aware of that are instantly satisfying, okay, that are meaningful enough for me to give up on things that, in the bigger scheme of life and my better judgment, are inconsequential. Inconsequential in the bigger scheme of things. And that's why people oftentimes sit with such regret. If
Yes.
only I had done this. I knew, I should have known, I could have. And they beat themselves up because they acted inconsistently with what they knew, right? And that was because in the moment, they were not linking the required behavior to what they genuinely believed. So it's oftentimes in those cases where a person undergoes what I call forgetfulness failure. I think it's entirely possible for people of great conviction in states of fatigue and in states of difficulty to become forgetful at times of even the things that are most important. How do I know that? When they fall, they have a great sense of remorse. They have a great sense of regret. They don't try and justify it. They don't try and say, I'll shuffle my beliefs around to align the things. I was inconsistent, but, I actually wasn't. No, they own it. It hurts them. It weighs on them. And that's the pain they are trying to avoid by doing what's required. So that is exactly what the mind and brain are aware of. The brain hates the weight of hypocrisy. The mind and brain hate the weight of, again, inconsistency. So one of the ways in which, again, the part of the brain in the world have made it possible for us to bypass that is to kill any sense of who you really are. I'm amazed as to how many people I sit with now who have no real sense of purpose, no real sense of conviction about anything.
Yes.
And for that reason, they are floating around with zero hope, right? The hope is, again, it's an anticipation or an expectation of something that's good to come. And sometimes that's what fuss is clinging to. It's saying it's worth going through all the difficulties right now because in the end, it's going to be worth it. That's fuss arguing that, unless it's tied with the identity that's part of that. So again, I'm going to be most super self-controlled when I'm doing what I do for a reason that is not entirely linked to an outcome. They are linked, usually, right? But the outcome is not the motivating driving force. So I push that out there, and I know you know what I'm saying, but if you were somebody who was hearing that from me for the first time, what would your questions be? Because I want to make sure this is clear.
Okay. So obviously now I realize there has to be some purpose building and seeking purpose, and then realizing that self-control is far more attached to these deeper values
Yes.
than external. And I think when I listen to this, I realize that if I don't understand self, if I don't have a purpose, what am I then anchoring myself? So external, I would see what is socially awarded, what's socially validated, success, money, power, having more stuff, more feathers, obviously, on my tail to show off in hope of gratification from outside, adding value from external, from outside validation. So where do I start? And this is really old age question. Purpose is quite hard to,
Yep.
what is my purpose?
Yep.
So we find that this, funny enough, in work as well, we find this kind of unhappiness. I'm not happy at work. Why? I don't exercise authentic self. And what is authentic self then? I mean, how do you even start building these values around? How do I start building? This is a long journey. This is something then you have to have a right questions. This is where you have to dig deeper. So where do you start these conversations?
In many respects, as I said to you, before in some of the other videos, I want people to understand that you could take the principles of what I've said right now and you can pursue, pretty much anything that's within the realm of possibility and achieve it on the basis of what I've said. However, to discuss the real meaningful things, those are the things that require genuine introspection and a genuine willingness to assess, do I actually know myself? On the mind map, I say the area of self-concept. Immediately underneath that, it says significantly inaccurate. Most people don't genuinely know themselves. They don't. So to your point, how do we try and grow that? How do we try and develop that? That is an entirely separate consideration that we have to do. And having now started the school, the Perspective for Life school, that, we have the Mind Map Monday conversations, that hour where we can sit and talk. This is the platform. That's the area where I have opportunity again to share, not tell. My intention is not to tell people what they should again do or what they have to know. It's to share, right? Here are the things that I know work. I know work because they are super clear and logical. I know they work from personal experience. I know they work from thousands and thousands and thousands of case studies. And that I'm putting out there, I'm sharing. So the question again, how do I forge the kinds of things that will become those solid things that I can anchor my day-to-day behavior and thinking on? Those are things that require deep thought and openness and consideration. So for me, even when you look at the school, sort of when you join that, I make a tremendous point of trying to say everybody has their own perspective, everybody has their own opinion, and everybody is welcome to that because that's how life works. That doesn't mean that everybody's opinion is equally valid, right? What that means is we could be wrong in our estimation of things. When I mention design, and you'll hear me say, we are like this by design, immediately somebody who's listening will say, oh, that implies that he thinks something about where we as human beings come from. And if there's design, there must be purpose. So I know where I'm going to tap in to that understanding and seek that kind of information. And again, I'm open about that, right? For me, that comes from an understanding of what I believe the Bible teaches. Now, that doesn't mean for 1 second that people cannot use their own minds and brains on convictions that are different to mine to benefit them in their pursuit of trying to live well, trying to live meaningfully, trying to live creatively, trying to enjoy the satisfactions of completing tasks and making other people, helping other people. Those things apply because, in many respects, again, I believe that that is what we call common grace. So oftentimes, because of the platform that we're addressing things, I'm wanting people to understand the principle more than the detail. So my encouragement would be, how do you get to know yourself? And the simple fact might be simply a matter of, I will sit with somebody, say, for example, in the week, and they've said to me, I just have no purpose. And my question to them in that situation is, and these are young people often, is, can you see? Yes. Can you hear? Yes. Can you smell and taste, and do your hands and feet work? Yes. So you're good for something, whether that's carrying something, whether that's drawing something, whether that's tasting something. What you have, when you take stock of what you have, you immediately have insight into what you can do. And immediately, if you have insight into what you can do, in other words, your functional capacity or your functional tendencies, you can have an idea of where might that be useful. And if I find that I have these simple things and that I enjoy this kind of thing, be clear on what you enjoy, be clear on what you like, be clear on the people around you and what they like, because the probabilities, if you have the faculties as I just described, you can be of service. You can help somebody. You can give something to somebody. So when we look at these kinds of things, you don't even necessarily need to have, and again, I say by design, insight into all the bigger things of life and eternity and origins and all the things which I love to explore. You can still, with what we have, find meaningful enough reason within what you are as a person, what you have in terms of relationship and responsibility. Whether that's I'm employed to make tea and make good tea and deliver it on time. Might sound like a silly example, but there is such satisfaction to be had in being consistent with who I am and with what I can do. And inevitably, when you do that well, opportunities open to develop skills, to do more things. And that's where this whole idea of it is a journey. It does take time, but we are of the opinion that we need to have everything now and we need to have it instantly and fully. It's a lie. It's an utter lie. And that's why we have impatient people with no clarity of who they are, of what they can do, of what value they can add. And when they find themselves in that state of feeling, I have no value, then the question is, why am I even here? The number of young people who, in that state, their minds and their thinking drifts to, there's no point for me being here. And the logical consequence for them is, let me take myself out of here. That kind of thing is so sad, but it's largely the product of not having clarity in terms of who you are and what value you have and what you can do, because somehow it's not at the level that society has indicated you have to achieve in terms of, again, success, whether it be financial or whether it be how beautiful your spouse or whoever your partner is, or how well you dress or any of those kinds of things. The standard, the bar has been set so unrealistically high for most people. And the audience and the judges are our entire world. And we are not able to achieve that. We have a sense of insignificance. We have a sense of, insecurity. We have a sense of no significant value. And again, in that state, we shift from a pursuit of maximal satisfaction into a preservation of resources. So we withdraw, we become depressed, all the while having to try and portray an image of being wonderfully successful. And meanwhile, we're basically collapsing inside. We're anxious to begin with, then we're depressed, then we are literally pressed to the point of, again, what is that I'm here for? What is that purpose? And if there aren't clear answers, right, the natural tendencies, the pursuit and preservation of maximal satisfaction will keep pushing unrelentlessly and usually drive us to very, very poor decisions. So again, I end up going way off from what I had, initially expected. But the point is, I think as I do that, it maybe highlights why I'm now starting to have these conversations, right? Is because there is a lot at stake. There is so much at stake. And it's so much more than just becoming successful in worldly terms. It really is so much more than that. So if I could lighten the load, the trick, you have to find reason and hopefully multiplicity of reasons in the moment to do the things that are right, to do the things that are good, to do the things that are helpful, as opposed to the things that are inconsistent with that and inevitably bring about the disappointment that we're trying so desperately to avoid. Man, that was a lot heavier than I was expecting.
Yeah. Well, as I was listening to you, I was thinking, I was reflecting on myself, and I start with the much more simple things, and I ask myself, what are the values really that I want to live by?
Mhm.
And they hopefully accumulate to someone that lives beyond self for this reason of self. So I do know that my values are really to be kind as much as, and show up kind, that I see other people, that show respect equally to everyone. I think that I show humility, and then so there are certain things I really try to exercise, and with that become a certain person. And with that, the purpose it becomes initially to become that person. And that person will have a purpose in itself, because if I become a person that can help, can truly make some impact, then I eventually I almost seek full identity. But I do start with establishing the values. So, how do I show up daily? How do I show up daily to, what does it mean to do the right thing? So I do define it very clearly. I think most people can assume they know, and because, um, same like when I ask, what does it mean to be a friend? It's funny, we use these words so often that we never sit down and precisely define them. So, what does it mean, and how do you know when someone is not a good friend? How do you? And these are such a simple, almost childish questions, but we kind of think intuitively we know them and we don't question. I do think with questioning a little bit more, what does it mean really to be a moral person? What does it mean to do the right thing? Why I don't do the right thing? I keep saying over and over, these conversations are quite hard in everyday life because we are so focused on, a to-do list and whatever's in front of us. This is why very often when people come to you or to come to anyone who they're in a vacuum from everyday things and where they have a space to safely only focus on themselves, they do not think about your feelings, they do not think about, explaining themselves, but rather really examining. You ask yourself about assumptions that have never been examined. What do I truly believe? What I believe about the world? What I believe about the self? You start from there, and I think the purpose almost grows out of that identity you redefine. But you have to start asking, what are the values that I live by? You really have to ask, where did I source? Who is fueling them? How do I know? Why did I choose them? Who is choosing? So all of these things that are almost covered and then under the veil of just being in the motion. I think that for me is a very important part of seeking the purpose. And I think, asking good questions. Very often, I don't really think purpose of our conversations was also to give answers, but to invite a better conversations, to invite better conversations within self and within the
Yeah.
community that you live. Because I always hope that I will trigger something and then you will take that echo into your environment and talk to your partner differently, or have a more precise language to express yourself so the other person can actually stop mind reading and actually answer to the really what is underlying the problem. And you can start discussing what really hurts you. You can start discussing what really is interrupting my life. So that even triage here that if we can accomplish, we can invite better questions because these are ongoing conversations
Yes.
anyway. And we hope to invite internal conversations, better internal questioning, which has the humbleness to doubt in self, the
Yep.
humbleness to question self, the humbleness to stop and say, how do I know this is the best way?
Yep.
How do I know where? And then to kind of think longer. So while no one really can give you these answers in terms of what is my purpose, because the moment you start changing things, you grow. So the purpose can grow as well. Your identity can grow. And this is wonderful. This is why I don't
That's
think there are
that's
no,
the idea.
exactly, the absolutes that we keep chasing. But what I love and I hope is being picked up, that when we don't know ourselves, we keep anchoring externally
Yes.
to any trends outside, to any gratification outside. And that is so not stable.
Dangerous.
That is so moving constantly. And then what I when we come back, so I have succeeded all. According to who, according to what? So you ask her, is it in line with what you ever examined about self and who you ever wanted to be? Or is it something that you picked up down the line from external forces or someone? What parents wanted from society keeps advertising, what I keep thinking will give you the most likes
Mm.
and all of this? Or is it really something I truly, truly believe in? So it's
Yeah.
a lot of there. I hope it's not something you can answer here, but it's definitely a good way to start with.
When I have a look at what you're saying now, with so many of the techniques that we have, if I look at the mind map, which I have here, basically it says the Perspective for Life mind map, a model of how we think, feel, live, learn, and grow, a self discovery guide to a
Yeah.
deeper understanding of self and others and the world as it is. And the idea is if we can see it better, we can live it better. That's the premise.
Yep.
So the idea there is, in many respects, yes, I can present, almost like saying, here's how you drive a car. You push the button nowadays, right? And this is how you steer, and this is how you accelerate, and this is how you brake. But if something goes wrong with the car, do you know how it works? So we're very, very quick to want to hop in and drive this body, this life that we have, with very little understanding of what's going on underneath in terms of the intricacies. And again, it doesn't require that you know every detail of everything,
No.
but having a good understanding of how the fundamental pieces work, that will enable us to at least be able to manage some of the challenges and difficulty when they arise. So that's a whole other section in many respects. This, which is why I put together the mind map. The mind map is there to have people look at something and see themselves. The number of people who will use words like, I recognized, or I just had this aha moment. And when it relates to self, and it relates to self and learning and growth and correction, that is, one of the things I absolutely love to try and help people with. Um, so yeah, I think at the end of the day, the trick was presented. At the end of the day, the reason the book Something Bigger was called Something Bigger is we will always act in line with what we perceive to be the superior satisfaction in the moment. If we can make the superior satisfaction something that relates to the things we discussed, identity, values or morals, or sort of responsibilities and relationships, if we can do that, the probabilities we can link that to the kinds of behaviors required, to achieve what we're hoping to achieve. And one of the things that you pointed to become the kind of person that I want to become. If you're able to make becoming somebody the goal,
Exactly.
and it becomes then something that feeds itself, that is one of the most, by design, valuable ways of actually becoming a person of great stability, great self control, great clarity, great direction, and very much able to navigate a lot of the temptations and challenges that the world throws.
It's interesting. We've noticed this that is counterintuitive that exercising quite frequently self-regulation offers the most freedom. And
Yes,
there's a peace that comes with
100%.
it, lack of shame, lack of
Yes.
regret. It's very liberating, although you would think you are restrained. But quite opposite, you are living in line with self and your values so consistently that you feel really
You're
feel
living safely.
absolutely. And it's amazing how little regret, and the regret is such a painful experience. And so, yeah,
So, in fact, again, I think the whole of the thing, all the things we've discussed today are substantially different and deeper than what I had expected. But this is part of the reason why I don't want to come into these conversations prepped for something. I want them to be conversations that people would have the opportunity, if they so chose, to look in, listen from the safety of their own, position, and be able to say, that's helpful, that's not. I always say this: pick the flowers, leave the weeds,
true.
take the stuff that's helpful, utilize it, right? Without having the sense that I or you are sitting here trying to dictate to people how they should or shouldn't be living. So we'll end on that one.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Luixie.